Frédéric Chopin was one of the greatest Polish patriots. He loved his country, and because of that love, he was able to give Poland a musical heritage that everyone, everywhere could understand. The Baroque Ostrowski Palace in Warsaw is the perfect introduction to this remarkable land. Today it is the home of the Chopin Institute. There was a time when Chopin's music was banned in his native country because the authorities said that in his music there were hidden guns. His piano, more than a century and a half old. Manuscript, penned by the hand of a genius. Three folk dances greatly influenced Chopin's compositions: the Krakowiak, the mazurka, and the polonaise. In their palace garden, the renowned Mazowsza dancers perform an original polonaise. In the Łazienki Park stands Szymanowski's monument to Chopin. It is a reproduction, for like almost everything else in Warsaw, the original had been destroyed during the war. Photos from the Polish archives show the actual war scenes. Warsaw was the first European capital to be bombed by Hitler's Air Force, but even worse damage took place towards the end of the war, during the uprising and 63-day battle of August 1944, when 300,000 Poles perished. By the time the Russians liberated Warsaw in January 1945, more than 12 million cubic feet of rubble lay strewn on the ground. Entire neighborhoods had vanished, and only 15 citizens came out to meet the soldiers from this city that once had had a population of more than 1 million. No other major European capital up to that time had suffered so completely. But Warsaw was rebuilt street by street, house by house, with the help of old plans, etchings, and paintings found in archives all over the world. It arose again much in the form which Bellotto, nephew of the court artist Canaletto, had painted it in the 18th century. But this is how it appears today, the resurrected old town, with St. Zygmunt's original statue perched atop a tall, narrow column, It's hard to realize that these buildings are new, perfect reproductions in every respect. Historical records revealed that some of the original houses had been built at the beginning of the 14th century in Gothic style, but it was the age of Baroque that provided the true embellishments for this old town. The walls of the Barbican, designed to withstand sieges in earlier times, were also restored after the war. And today they serve as an occasional showcase for young artists' works. Most contemporary Polish paintings are avant-garde and abstract. A number of foreign collectors pay regular visits to Warsaw, which they say is one of the two great centers of the rebirth of painting. For over 30 years, a genuine progression of innovations and experiments have driven Polish painters along paths which have anticipated those of the West. Andrzej Strumillo is one of the better-known contemporary artists. In his Old Town studio, we see him at work, and we see the surroundings chosen by a man that symbolizes the Polish character. Creativity, style, and versatility are marks of his personality, again expressed, this time in his illustrations for the Polish edition of Uncle Tom's Cabin. On his walls hung mementos of travels, mementos brought home from far-off places to his native Poland. New Warsaw, beyond the old town, is also a resurrected city, symbolized by the Nike statue of the resistance. Compared with her neighboring Eastern European capitals, Warsaw has an entirely different atmosphere. New things are happening daily, and the city's expanding in all directions and in all respects. The new Warsaw is a thriving city with an endless rebuilding program featuring the latest contemporary architectural styles. The liveliness of today's citizens in their rebuilt streets almost makes one forget the grim history of the not-too-distant past. The citizens talk and behave with an almost belligerent sense of freedom, sparked by their fiercely nationalistic spirit. In 1968, Poland celebrated the 50th anniversary of her re-emergence as an independent state, for Polish sovereignty was recovered only in 1918, after 123 years of foreign domination. While Switzerland has its Alps and Greece its antique ruins, Poland has foremost for the visitor, its people and their love of their motherland. And no place else, except perhaps Chicago and Detroit, will you find as many Polish people in an area of this size. The city's largest skyscraper is the 40-story Palace of Culture and Science. It has been said that the only man who is happy about the place is the caretaker, and he lives on the 38th floor and never sees it from the outside. There are many legends giving the origin of Warsaw's founding, but the one most often repeated is that of the lovely mermaid who swam up the Vistula River from her home in the Baltic Sea, and somewhere on these banks she saw a prince with whom she immediately fell in love. "Here you must build a city," she told him, "and you must name it for the first man and woman you meet after I leave you." He did build a city, and he named it for the first man, a fisherman who was called Vaj, and the first woman, his wife, called Java. and thus the legend of the naming of the capital on the banks of the Vistula, Warszawa, or Warsaw. Despite its industrial advances, Poland is still chiefly a nation of farms and small towns. The very word Pole was derived from the word pola, or polani, meaning field. Polish farmers have three loves. The first is God, who gave them the land. The second is the land itself, because God gave it. And the third is home, whose foundations are on the land that God gave. Along a country road, one comes upon a cottage. In a cottage such as this, one sees how they did things in the past. There were patterns traced in the sand floor, which were then copied and incorporated in the beautiful woven materials that they made and still make today: blankets, holiday dresses, rugs, and wall coverings. As a nation, Poland is the most devoutly religious country in Eastern Europe. Reminders of Poland's devotion to church traditions and undying faith can be found in many homes. Hundreds of religious shrines dot the landscape, but the holiest shrine of all is Jasna Góra, the Pauline monastery in the shining mountain at Częstochowa, where the alleged miracle of the 17th century took place during the war with Sweden. King Charles X of Sweden, during his attack on Poland in 1705, attempted to seize the monastery, which has contained since the 14th century the famed Black Madonna, supposedly painted by St. Luke. His forces, though superior in numbers, were held back by the prior of the monastery and a relative handful of soldiers behind the walls. And since the Black Madonna gave the defenders courage and determination, they were able to resist the attack successfully for 40 days, after which the Swedes gave up their siege and withdrew. The Madonna had been venerated by the Poles since 1656 as the Queen of Poland, and to this day she remains the country's prime symbol of nationalism, always turned to in times of crisis. From the tower of the Marriott in Krakow, the trumpeter sounds the Hejnal. This forlorn tune dates back to the early 13th century, when a boy watchman warned the sleeping city that the Tartars were about to attack. But before he could complete the call, a Tartar arrow pierced his throat. True to the tradition, today's trumpeter never finishes the Hejnal. One of Europe's largest and loveliest market squares, the Rheineck, stretches out in front of the Cloth Hall and below the 14th century Gothic tower of the old town hall. In the 13th century, when Warsaw was but a provincial village, this was the royal capital. And still, Krakow is the nation's art capital. High atop Wawel Hill, the early kings built their palace and cathedral. The first masterpiece of Italian architecture north of the Alps was created here. In the 16th century, King Sigmund rebuilt it in the present style. The great courtyard often serves as the setting for art classes, whose members sketch the main quadrangle of 3 stories of galleries in arcades which are supported by slender columns. Reminiscent of the Florentine design, the palace contains priceless furnishings and innumerable arch treasures. The Cathedral is Poland's Westminster Abbey. A predominantly Gothic structure with Renaissance modifications, it remained both coronational and burial place for kings and queens for over 400 years. 40 kings and queens and countless heroes, poets, and bishops lie entombed behind those massive doors. Krakow was founded around the 8th century, tradition holds, and the Tartars came in the early 13th century, spreading destruction and plundering. Every year on the anniversary of their final defeat, the Lyconic procession takes place, and its highlight is the retreat of the last Tartar soldier. For hours on end, he rides a 60-pound wooden horse. Some say that the last Tartar never could find his way out of Krakow, and so he was chased by the citizens from one building to the next. In any case, it's hard and hot work being a Tartar on a wooden horse, and frequent refreshment stops are perfectly in order. Only a few of Krakow's original fortifications have survived. The finest of these is the Barbican, which dates from about 1498. Together with St. Florian's Gate, the Barbican is a remarkable example of the medieval art of rampart design, which was modeled on the Arab Moorish style. The second oldest university in Eastern Europe is Krakow's Jagiellonian, named after the pagan Lithuanian chieftain Jagiello, who later became the Catholic king of Poland, Władysław Jagiello. It was a brilliant center of learning in the 15th and 16th centuries, and one of its most famous students was Nicholas Copernicus, who laid the foundation for modern astronomy by proving that the planets revolved around the sun and not around the Earth. And speaking of heavenly bodies, modern students' quarters have grown up in Krakow, and now the co-eds have a not-so-private place for their sunbaths. And speaking of Polish women in general, this young lady was a student and part-time guide. She pointed out the famous arcades of the Cloth Hall and told us that they had been originally designed for merchants in the 14th century by King Casimir the Great. He was the man whom they said found Poland made of wood and left Poland made of stone. Krakow was developed along Gothic lines. It flourished during the golden age of Polish history, but after that, in the 16th century, it declined. And much of what we see today in this royal city is a restoration, but a restoration necessitated by the ravages of time alone. For even Krakow's conquerors have always preferred to inhabit this city rather than to destroy it. By far the most outstanding of Krakow's art treasures is the Triptych Altarpiece of the Marriott, which was carved by Wittgenstein in the 15th century. Standing 43 feet high and 36 feet wide, it was made from gilded wood adorned with polychrome. The artist knew that the figures would be seen from below, and so he created life-size statues in proper perspective. The inner compartments portray the Assumption of the Virgin. Wittgenstein worked on the triptych for 12 years. No detail was overlooked. Dramatic, lifelike expressions contribute to the merited fame of the masterpiece. A masterpiece which is considered to be the most valuable wood carving in Eastern Europe. Art has for centuries lived at the forefront of Poland's national consciousness. A branch of the National Museum housed in the Czartoryski Palace features foreign art and numbers among its prime exhibits such works as Leonardo da Vinci's Lady with an Ermine. Also on display was a Rembrandt landscape. Zakopane, Poland's foremost vacation area, lies at an altitude of 3,000 feet in the high Tatra division of the Carpathian mountain range. Beautiful in the summer, it's a popular skiing center in winter, but summer or winter, tourists can ascend 6,000 feet up to Kaspowy Wiecz by funicular. Here a vast panorama of the valley unfolds, and far below, the town of Zakopane itself. Scores of wooden churches, similar to the Norwegian-type stave churches, are perched on grassy knolls along the forest roads. On Sunday, they're usually filled to capacity. The Dunajec River, whose source is in the western Tatras, has carved out a passage through the Pianini chain of mountains. A trip by raft down the river past the limestone cliffs is an unforgettable highlight of vacationing in the Carpathians. The river winds and twists between almost vertical walls of rock, and the landscape changes at each bend. Rafts are easily taken apart at the end of the journey, placed on horse-drawn carts and returned upstream and made ready for another trip. The journey covers 9 kilometers in just over an hour, and it opens up vistas of incomparable natural beauty. Poland's landscape here might recall the Middle Rhine or the gorges of the Tarn in southern France. Serenity, tranquility, in an Arcadian setting. Here on the Dunajec River, our journey in Poland ends. It's been a journey through a land whose people may settle in far-off countries, but who in their hearts have never really gone away.